I didn't want to be here in this place.
Lennox Vance sent me away in front of 5 executives while I was going into labor and trying to stay on my feet on the marble floor. I was his wife, and I was carrying his child. And still, he looked at me like I was a problem that needed to disappear. So I called the one man I should never have called, Angelo Vance, his brother. He crossed an ocean for me. He held my hand through the delivery, and he silently offered me the protection my husband never gave me. Now I had to decide whether accepting Angelo's refuge was worth losing everything for good, because Lennox would only understand too late that, when he sent me away, he may have handed me over to the one man who would never give me back. Hi, I'm Kay. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Door He Closed. The first sharp pang came before the alarm clock. I opened my eyes to the ceiling of the penthouse on 79th Street and listened to the silence on the other side of the bed, the same silence I'd been hearing for weeks. Lennox was sleeping in the guest room. My 38-week belly pressed down on my hip, and the pang came again, deeper, with a strange warmth running down my thigh. I sat up slowly. The sheet was wet. I breathed through my nose, the way they'd taught me in the prenatal class I took alone, and out of reflex I touched my left wrist, the spot where my mother used to wear a thin gold bracelet. The room was still, with that smell of waxed wood and freshly changed flowers the housekeeper left on the dresser every morning. The day had barely begun, but the city was already humming beyond the windows, Central Park glowing yellow down below. I had 2 practical choices: call the driver or wait. I called. The garage attendant at the building answered with the polished voice of someone who'd already been briefed. Mr. Vance asked that the car stay with him today, Mrs. Vance. He said you'd understand. I bit my lower lip. I understood. I got up. I put on a dark cotton dress that still fit, grabbed the bag that had been ready for 2 weeks in the closet, and crossed the hallway without making a sound. The guest room door was closed. I didn't knock. I'd knocked before, a month ago, when I felt the first false contractions, and he'd opened just enough to tell me that wasn't the time. I took the service elevator down. On the sidewalk on 79th Street, the October air closed up my lungs for a second, with that smell of damp asphalt and trampled leaves that only Manhattan has in that season. The leaves in the park across the avenue were yellow, red, golden, colors that felt like a cruel joke for a woman about to give birth with nowhere to go. I raised my hand for a cab. Park Avenue and 52nd, please. The driver looked at my belly in the rearview mirror. Ma'am, the hospital's closer if you park in 52nd. He shrugged. We crossed Midtown while I held the seatbelt over my belly and counted contractions by the hand of my watch. 10 minutes. 8. 7. The lobby of the Vance Holdings Tower was a corridor of black marble that opened its mouth onto Park Avenue. The receptionist recognized me before I reached the turnstile and opened the gate with that trained smile that hides curiosity. I rode the executive elevator up to the 47th floor. The glass walls looked out over the city's rooftops. I kept my eyes on the floor, counting the seams in the gray carpet, feeling my belly tighten again before the elevator doors opened with that discreet chime. Lennox's secretary, Diane, stood up from her desk when she saw me step off the elevator. Mrs. Vance, he's in a meeting. I know he's in a meeting. I walked right past her. Diane called my name twice, lower the second time, because her voice died when I put my hand on the handle of the glass-walled room. 5 men around the oval table, Lennox standing at the head with the projector remote in his hand, a bar chart floating behind him. The 5 turned their heads. Lennox didn't. Lennox. He turned. His face had that specific look he had whenever he saw me outside of the agreed place. Eyebrows still, chin slightly raised, a breath out through his nose. Holly. His voice cut through the office air like a comma, not a person. I'm in a meeting. I know. My water broke. The driver isn't available. One of the executives cleared his throat. Another dropped his eyes to his tablet. Lennox took a deep breath, smiled at the 5 men with the mouth he used at galas, and said in a low voice, "My apologies for the interruption, gentlemen. My wife is going through a sensitive moment." Then he turned to me. The smile vanished. His voice didn't rise. It dropped, and that was worse. "Handle this away from me. We already have a team for that." I stood still. I felt the fluid trickle again, now down my calf, forming a circle on the navy carpet that was worth more than the annual salary of most of the people due to be born that day. The air in the room smelled of black coffee and expensive cologne, and not one of the 5 men around the table looked at me for more than a second. Lennox. Diane will call someone. Holly. Out. I left. Not because he ordered me to. I left because the next contraction came before the answer I had ready, and it folded my body over in the doorway. Diane appeared with a glass of water trembling in her hand. I walked down the marble corridor and pressed my forehead against the cold wall. I slid slowly to the floor, out of sight of anyone who might walk by. That's when she appeared. Small black hair pinned back with a plastic clip, gray uniform, a bucket half a meter away. She looked at me without flinching, looked at me like someone recognizing something. "Ma'am." She knelt without hurrying, took a small bottle of water from the pocket of her apron, opened it, held it out to me. "Drink." I drank. Her hands were warm, and carried that light smell of coconut soap that comes from cleaning floors all day. "Esperanza." She said her name like handing over a key. "The ambulance is already on the way. I called from the floor phone when I saw you come in. Breathe with me." I breathed. She held my hand and counted in Spanish, softly. "Uno, dos, tres," and I counted along without understanding why. Somewhere in my bag, my phone buzzed. I grabbed it with my free hand. 2 names came up when I swiped my thumb across the favorites. One was my father's. The other was a man I'd met on 2 occasions. At my engagement, where he poured me a glass of water and was the only one who asked if I was okay, and at the wedding, where he argued with his brother and went back to Milan the next day. I didn't even know why I had his number saved. I'd asked Ren for it on a winter night, for family emergencies. I stared at both names. I bit my lip. The phone screen kept fogging up from my breath and the sweat running down my temple, and even so, the 2 names seemed to pulse side by side, waiting for me to make up my mind already. I tapped the second one. It rang 3 times. In Milan, it was 5 in the afternoon. He picked up on the 4th. "Holly?" His voice was lower than I remembered, and cleaner. It didn't have the office echo Lennox's voice had on any call. "Angelo." I tried to steady my voice. "It's me. I'm in labor. In the hallway at Vance. Lennox sent me away. I couldn't get hold of my father." There was a silence on the other end, but it wasn't a silence that weighed on me. It was a silence that was deciding. "Which hospital are they taking you to?" "Lenox Hill. I think Lenox Hill. I'm on my way." That was all he said. Not, "Stay calm." Not, "Everything will be fine." Not, "Are you sure?" 2 words, and the sound of a chair being pushed back on the other side of the ocean, and he was gone. Esperanza squeezed my hand. "Is he coming?" "He's coming." I looked at her without understanding why I was so certain. "He's coming." The siren grew down on Park Avenue and rose through the elevator shaft like an early promise. Esperanza didn't let go of my hand until the paramedic stopped in front of me. When she let go, she gripped my left wrist for a second, exactly at the spot where my mother had worn her bracelet, and said, "You're going to make it, Mija." They put me on the stretcher. The black marble ceiling slid over me, and the cold light of the recessed bulbs flickered in sequence above my face as the stretcher rolled toward the elevator. I looked up and thought, with a strange clarity for a woman having contractions 5 minutes apart, that he was coming from Milan, and that my son wasn't going to wait. The stretcher entered the elevator. The doors closed, and I understood, with the sound of the siren cutting through the glass out there, that I was going to give birth before he arrived. Chapter 2. 12 Hours and an Ocean. The private room at Lenox Hill had peach-colored curtains and an analog clock above the TV. I stared at the hand, because looking at anything else hurt more. The ticking was tiny, muffled by the hiss of the AC, and even so it filled my whole chest, as if every second were a hand pressing my ribs from the inside. 11 in the morning. The head nurse, a woman in her 50s named Patricia, came in with a clipboard and the face of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. There was a faint smell of antiseptic on her scrubs, mixed with vanilla from some drugstore lotion, and for some reason that detail calmed me. "Mrs. Vance, we need consent for a mild induction, and we need the contact for the person responsible. Is the number we have your husband's office?" "Yes," I swallowed. "Did you try already?" 3 times. "His assistant said he's in a meeting, and that he'll be sending the PR team to accompany you." I laughed. It was a short, humorless laugh that scraped my throat on the way out, and she looked at me with a patience that made me want to cry more than the previous contraction had. "I don't want his PR team. I want to sign on my own." "Ma'am, where do I sign?" She handed me the clipboard. I signed Holly Ashford Caldwell in all 3 fields. My hand steady, and gave it back. The pen was a cheap hospital ballpoint, the cap chewed at the tip, and I noticed that as if the detail were anchoring me to reality. Patricia hesitated for half a second before taking it back. I think she'd seen other women try to sign alone, and then back out when the husband showed up. I didn't back out. "And your father?" "We have Harlan Ashford's number in the records. You can try." She tried. She came back 10 minutes later with the impeccably neutral expression you learn in the ER of an expensive hospital. Your father's office reports that he's in a meeting in London and will return the call when possible. I looked at the ceiling. There was a tiny water stain in one corner, the size of a coin, and I counted its outline while I didn't cry. Patricia touched my shoulder gently and left. Wren arrived at 3:30 in the afternoon, hair escaping from her bun, 2 coffees in hand, and a bag that seemed to contain the entire contents of a Chelsea art gallery. He kicked you out. That was her first sentence. No greeting. I read it in my partner's group chat before I read it from you. Holly. I know. Holly. I know. She sat on the edge of the bed and held my hand. Her hands were cold from the October air, and the silver ring she wore on her thumb tapped lightly against my wrist. Wren had known me since we were 15, when we shared a dorm room in Switzerland, and she was the only person I didn't have to translate anything for. You want me to stay? Yes. I squeezed her hand. But I know the exhibition install is today. Fuck the exhibition. Wren. I smiled for the first time that day. Go, Holly. Go. I don't want anyone here out of obligation. I called someone. She looked at me with that face of someone who knew exactly who I hadn't called and got suspicious about who I had. But she didn't ask. She kissed my forehead, whispered je t'aime in French, the way we used to in school, and left, promising to come back that night. When the door closed behind her, the silence came back in layers. First the AC, then the clock, then my own breathing, out of step with both. By 10:30, contractions were 4 minutes apart. The window of the room looked out on a row of Park Avenue buildings lighting up little by little, window by window, and I thought, against my will, of how many of those homes held inside them a woman pretending everything was fine. Patricia came back to check on me and said, in that practical tone, that there were still hours to go. I picked up my phone from the nightstand and dialed the number that was still at the top of my recent calls. He picked up before the second ring. Holly, where are you? Just leaving JFK now. 30-some minutes to the hospital, depending on traffic. I heard an engine roar on the other end, the distant sound of a police siren cutting through the autumn night in New York. In Milan, it was 2 a.m. He'd taken the executive flight the moment I called. Angelo, I'm here. Say something. I don't want to hang up. There was a silence that wasn't awkward. It was the silence of someone arranging the right sentence. I'm finishing a project. A small chapel on Lake Como. There's a little 14th century church they were going to demolish, and a couple called me in to see if it could be saved. It can. The back wall is all gray stone, and I put a single window behind the altar, low, the height of an adult. When the afternoon sun comes in, the light doesn't fall down over people's heads. It rises up from the floor. I closed my eyes. A contraction came, long, opening from the inside out as if trying to split a beam inside me. I gripped the phone until I felt the hard edge dig into my palm. Keep going, please. There's only one bench. Long, dark wood. No ornament. I wanted whoever walked in to have nowhere to look except at the light rising from the floor. He paused. Holly, I'm here. Do you like chapels? I laughed, quietly, with the contraction still passing. I'd never thought about it. Think about it now. I like the one you just described. Good. The contraction let go. I took a deep breath, and the air in the room smelled of saline and something vaguely citrusy from the hallway, maybe a cleaner they'd run earlier. In 2 hours on the phone with that man, I learned he made fresh pasta, that he hated airports, that he had a dog named Bruno in Milan being looked after by Silas, and that he read aloud when he was alone, so the house wouldn't go mute, he said. In 2 years of marriage, I'd never known whether Lennox preferred coffee or tea in the winter. At 11:41 at night, the door to the room opened. I was lying on my side in bed, sweating, hair stuck to the nape of my neck, when I saw the dark coat come in first. Then him, cabin bag set down beside the armchair, still with the orange airline tag on it. His face had the imprint of the airplane seat against his left temple, a day's worth of stubble, and he hadn't changed clothes since Milan. The coat carried the cold smell of an airport runway and some dry, woody cologne that didn't match anything in there. He crossed the room in 4 steps, didn't ask permission, stopped beside the bed, took off his coat slowly, and I saw his hands up close for the first time. Large hands, long fingers, with that dark smudge on the side of the right thumb I would later learn to recognize as dried India ink. I'm here. I held out my hand. He took it. It wasn't a polite squeeze. It was his hand closing around mine the way someone shuts a door against a bad wind. His palm was warm, still holding the temperature of the car from JFK, and I felt the roughness of a small callus at the base of his index finger. I squeezed back. He pulled the armchair from the window over beside the bed with his free foot, without letting go. How long? he asked Patricia, who had appeared at the door. She's entering active labor now. It could be the small hours. He nodded, sat, looked at me, and I could see, close up for the first time, that he had the same eyes as his brother, but nothing of the same face. In Lennox's eyes there was a calculation. In his there was a question. And the question was, what do you need? Not what is this going to cost me? You didn't have to come, I said, because that was what women like me were trained to say. I did. It was a single word, no emphasis, and even so it sounded more definitive than every promise I'd heard in 2 years of marriage. A contraction came deeper than the previous ones. I arched my neck, squeezed his hand hard, and he didn't pull back so much as a millimeter. I felt his fingers steady around mine, exact counterpressure, as if he'd always known that was the right way to hold a woman's hand in labor. When it passed, I had tears in my eyes, and he was looking at me with a quietness that hurt more than the pain. Angelo, I'm here. I'm about to have a baby. You are. He bent his forehead against the back of my hand, a small gesture, no theatrics. His beard scraped my skin, rough and warm, and I'll be here when he gets here. I closed my eyes. Outside, the New York night kept going, with cabs and sirens and the tide of people who had no idea that inside that room, at that hour, a man I barely knew had crossed an ocean for a woman married to his brother, and that I, for the first time in 2 years, was about to go through the most sacred moment of my life, holding the right hand from the wrong family. Chapter 3. His Hands. The first real contraction came at 2:10 in the morning and pulled out of me a sound I didn't know. It was a low animal sound that seemed to come from a place in my chest I'd never visited. Angelo was on his feet before I finished groaning, hand reaching for the call button at the headboard, voice low asking for the nurse without letting go of my arm. The armchair beside the bed still held the crease of his body from before, and the dark coat was still tossed over the back, as if he'd forgotten it existed. "Breathe with me," he said. "That's it. Breathe." I breathed, not because someone asked me to, but because his hand was there and seemed to be the only steady thing in the room. The rest, the monitor blinking green above my head, the IV dripping against the plastic edge, the antiseptic smell that kept entering my nose with every breath, the rest was noise. His hand was not. The on-duty nurse, a tall woman with graying hair pinned in a low bun, came in with the calm hurry of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. She measured the dilation, noted it on the bedside chart, lifted her eyes to Angelo as if checking a visitor's badge. "Are you the father?" There was a second. Just 1 second. Angelo didn't look at me, didn't try to consult me, didn't make a scene. "I'm her brother-in-law. I'm here for whatever she needs." The nurse accepted that. She wrote down something I couldn't see. She said in 40 minutes we'd go down to the delivery room. Before leaving, she adjusted the IV stand with a brisk gesture and looked at me with the mildness of someone who'd seen too many women give birth alone and knew how to read the kind of company that was or wasn't worth noting. 40 minutes. I didn't know where to put 40 minutes inside my body. The next contraction came in 3, and was worse. I squeezed Angelo's hand hard enough to feel his finger bones settle against mine. He didn't flinch, didn't make a joke, didn't say any of the sentences I'd imagined a man would say, didn't say it'll pass, didn't say calm down, didn't say you can do this. He just leaned his forehead against mine, and stayed. His skin was warm, with a faint smell of hotel soap mixed with the exhaustion of someone who'd crossed an ocean without unpacking. "Tell me something. Anything," I asked between 2 breaths. "Anything. Don't let me think." He thought for half a second. Then he started talking about an inner courtyard at the chapel on Lake Como, the way the afternoon light hit a whitewashed wall and turned the white gold for 4 minutes before turning it orange. About a stone he'd had cut wrong 3 times because the stonemason kept rounding off an edge he wanted sharp. About the single window, facing the lake. No frame, just fixed glass and a dark steel casement. He talked about the silence that gathered there at 5 in the afternoon, the kind of silence that doesn't weigh on you, that opens up space instead of closing it. I closed my eyes. I saw the window. I saw the light. The contraction passed and I hadn't noticed its peak. "You're good at this," I said. "At what?" "At being there." He didn't answer, but his hand squeezed mine lightly, 2 fingers against my wrist, and stayed. At 3:40, the nurse came back with 2 more women and a transport gurney. Angelo let go of my hand for the first time in nearly 2 hours, and the cold that entered the space where his fingers had been frightened me more than the next pain. He walked alongside the gurney down the corridor to the delivery room door, gowned himself in the blue scrub the nurse held out without asking anything, and came in with me. The gurney wheels squeaked softly against the linoleum, and the corridor lights passed over my face at regular intervals, like headlights on a road I hadn't chosen to enter. The room was too white. Everything inside it had the hard gleam of stainless steel in cold light. I heard my own breathing ricochet off the walls and barely recognized it. The obstetrician, a short woman with thin wire-rimmed glasses, positioned herself between my knees with the serenity of someone who'd seen the world be born many times. Angelo stood on the left side, his hand under mine again. The other one, I saw out of the corner of my eye, was stained dark with India ink at the knuckle of his index finger, leftovers from some drawing he'd probably done on the plane. The obstetrician said her name once, said the time once, asked me to push. I pushed. The rest I remember in pieces. The obstetrician's voice counting to 10 as if counting the timing of a tide. The nurse with the low bun wiping my face with a warm compress that smelled faintly of water and mint. Angelo saying very close to my ear, "One more, Holly, just one more." My grandmother's name in his voice, and I thought, with no right to think it in a moment like that no one had pronounced my name that way in at least 2 years. Not as a question, not as an order, as belonging. Theo was born at 4:17. He cried before he was even all the way out. A cry that wasn't pain, it was protest. And the obstetrician laughed quietly behind her glasses and said, "This one already came with an opinion." The nurse lifted him up, and I saw for a fraction of a second a small purple perfect body being laid on my still damp chest. I didn't cry from the pain. I cried from the relief. It was such a huge relief that it felt like something else. It felt like coming home from a journey that had lasted a whole lifetime. I touched his head with my fingertips, slowly, afraid he might come apart. He didn't. He breathed against my neck. He smelled of something new, of milk not yet drunk, of a perfume that hadn't existed anywhere in the world before that minute. Angelo was silent beside me. When I turned my face, I saw his eyes were full. Not crying, just full, held in the way everything about him was held in. "Do you want to hold him?" I asked, and my voice came out hoarse. He hesitated. "You just got to hold him." "I know. Do you want to hold him?" He nodded. The nurse helped, showed him where to support the head, adjusted the white blanket around the small body. Angelo received Theo with the precision of someone who'd just accepted the most expensive delivery of his life. The ink-stained hand settled the baby against his chest, as if he had weights and counterweights calculated, as if every inch of newborn skin were a structure that had to be supported without trembling. I just looked. There was no other way to describe it. I just looked, with the obstetrician still finishing her work at the other end of the gurney, and the nurse jotting something on the clipboard, and the wall clock reading 4:19, and something happened inside me that I couldn't name. A crack, not the pain, the recognition. I looked at the big man holding the tiny baby, at the stained fingers around the small nape, at the way he dropped his chin until it almost touched Theo's forehead, and something inside my chest that had been hardening for 2 years gave way all at once. It wasn't relief. It was a kind of fear, too. The good kind. The one that shows up when you realize you have something to lose. "Holly," Angelo called softly, without taking his eyes off the baby. He's small. He is." I smiled, tired. The nurse said everything's fine. Angelo nodded. He kissed the baby's forehead lightly, and handed Theo back into my arms with the same millimeter precision with which he'd received him. When he passed Theo to me, I reached out with my other hand and touched his wrist. It was a silly gesture. I was just going to pull the baby in, but my hand landed on his wrist and stayed. My fingers covered the inner side where the vein shows blue under the skin, and I felt his pulse beat against my palm, fast, out of step with the stillness of his face. It was 2 seconds, maybe 3, long enough for both of us to pretend it was just a practical movement of transfer. He didn't pull his arm away. I did, eventually. They took me back to the room at 5:15. Angelo walked alongside the gurney again, his bag still forgotten in the armchair of the room where he'd left it 6 hours earlier. The corridor seemed different now, wider, quieter, as if the whole building were honoring what had just happened inside one of those rooms. The nurse with the low bun showed up again, now with a different clipboard, the kind with thick paper printed with the hospital crest in the corner. "Would you like to do the provisional registration now or tomorrow?" "Now," I said. She read the fields in a low voice, marking with her pen. Male, time of birth, weight, length, mother's full name, baby's name. "Theo," I said. "Theo," she repeated, writing. "Surname?" That was it. It was on that huge blank line on the form that I stopped. I bit my lower lip. I felt Angelo breathing beside me, without weight, without pressure. He didn't speak, didn't tilt his head, didn't glance at me out of the corner of his eye. He just existed beside the bed, holding, out of my line of sight, the blanket he'd taken from the armchair to lay over my feet. I knew exactly what he was doing without looking. The way he smoothed the hem of the fabric before setting it down. The care not to bump the IV. That was how he decided to stay. Through the details no one would ask of him. Ashford, I said. Theo Ashford. The nurse wrote it down. From the way she looked at me, she'd already read some headline at some point in her life and understood the size of what that line of paper was settling. That's the provisional maternal registration, Mrs. Vance. The registry office will open the formal process in the coming weeks, and at that point, the presumed paternal surname is added automatically. You can contest it then, with an attorney, if you prefer. I know, but I won't want to. She smiled a half smile. Left. Angelo took a while to speak. When he did, it was in a voice I'd never heard from him. Not the low voice from when he was angry, not the controlled voice on the phone, not the voice from the Lake Como chapel. A younger voice. That was the first decision he watched you make. Yes, good decision. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Theo was breathing against my chest, and the room smelled of antiseptic and arriving morning, and I had no answers for half the things happening inside me at once. The light was beginning to change on the other side of the window, a blue still, almost black, going gray at the edges, and the hospital silence at that hour had a particular quality, as if the whole building were breathing slowly along with us. Angelo sank into the armchair beside the bed, coat still folded over its arm, and said he'd stay until I fell asleep. I believed him. I closed my eyes. It was in that exact minute, with Theo at my chest and Angelo's hand a handspan from mine on the sheet, that his phone vibrated on the side table. I didn't open my eyes. I sensed, by the sound, that he turned the screen face down without answering. The phone vibrated again, and again. The 5th time in a row, I cracked my eyes open. Angelo was looking at the screen with the expression of someone who recognizes the number and is calculating how much peace that room still has left. His jaw moved once, slowly, the kind of movement a man makes when he's swallowing the first sentence he thought of saying. I didn't need to ask who it was. The storm was coming in the morning. Chapter 4. The Man Who Lunged, and the Man Who Stopped Him. Lennox arrived in the Lenox Hill lobby at 4:20 in the afternoon. I knew before he walked into the room because the air changed. First the sound of his press handler's heels hitting the corridor floor with that dry click I'd learned to recognize at galas and charity dinners. Then the tone of the floor receptionist, higher and firmer than it had been all day. There was a new smell invading the room too, beneath the hospital disinfectant, and the warm milk of the crib. Woody cologne, expensive, imported. The same one he wore the day he told me I needed to handle it. Angelo was in the armchair by the window, his sketchbook open on his knee, tracing some line in a sketch I hadn't been able to identify. Theo was sleeping in the acrylic bassinet beside my bed, wrapped in white cotton. Angelo closed the sketchbook before I even spoke. It's him, I said. I know. He stood up and came to the side of the bed, not in front, beside. He handed me, without ceremony, the bassinet remote that adjusted the tilt, a small gesture, but I understood it. If Lennox wanted to touch Theo, he'd have to go through both of us, and I'd need both my hands free. I felt the weight of the remote in my palm, the plastic still warm from his touch. The door to the room opened without a knock. Lennox walked in with the handler 2 steps behind. Navy suit I recognized from the prior year's Fashion Week show, polished shoes, hair combed back as if he'd come from a meeting and not a hospital lobby. He didn't look at the bassinet, didn't look at Theo. His eyes met Angelo's first, and stayed there for a fraction of a second that lasted longer than it needed to. Why are you in New York? The voice was low. It was always low when he was angry. I'd learned that in the first month of marriage, in a marble corridor, at a dinner where I'd laughed too loud at a comment from a French diplomat. Angelo didn't answer. He stood beside my bed, hands loose at his sides, ink stain still visible on the knuckle of his left index finger. I asked you a question, Angelo. Holly called me. Holly is my wife. Holly is a woman. The sentence came out of Angelo's mouth the way he said everything. No emphasis, no theatrics, as if he were commenting on the weather. But the handler behind Lennox crossed and uncrossed her hands once, and I saw it. Lennox turned his face to me for the first time. Get up. No, Holly, get up. I didn't move. I bit my lower lip the way I bit it when I was about to decide something hard. Except in that instant, lying there with my belly still sore, and my son half a meter from my elbow, I had already decided. The decision had been ready for 2 years. It had been waiting for the right words. I felt my left thumb find my right wrist out of reflex, in the place where my mother used to wear a thin gold bracelet. And there, on the skin where nothing else was, I found what I needed. You will not touch me again, I said. Ever. Lennox stopped. I saw the exact second he registered that I'd said it out loud. and the second after when he understood he had 3 witnesses, his handler, his brother, and the on-duty nurse who had appeared at the door drawn by the sound of voices. "You're medicated," he said. "I'll come back tomorrow." He turned to leave, and then, on his way to the door, he changed his mind. I saw his hand come up before the handler did. Saw his shoulder turn toward the bed, his arm already mid-gesture, his palm open. It wasn't fast. It was the slowest thing I've ever seen happen in a hospital room, time thickening the way it thickens in a nightmare, every millimeter of his arm cutting the air with the slowness of a film in slow motion. I didn't cower. I lifted my chin the way my mother had taught me to lift my chin at dinners, where someone tried to make me feel small, and I waited. The hand didn't land. Angelo stepped in with an economy of movement that looked rehearsed. A lateral step, a lunge, the open palm of his brother striking his forearm with a muffled sound, a dull thud of flesh against wool, and then Lennox's body being spun by the lapel of the navy suit against the wall of the room between the window and the doorframe. The hospital bulletin board shook on the neighboring wall. A leaflet on breastfeeding fell from the board and slid across the floor until it stopped near my left foot. The handler took half a step back. Theo, in the bassinet, didn't wake up. Angelo was holding his brother by the collar with just one hand. The other was open at his side. Ink-stained fingers relaxed, not clenched into a fist. He tilted his head until he was a handspan from Lennox's face. "You don't touch her," he said very quietly. "Not today. Not ever." Lennox laughed. It was a short, throaty, dry laugh. "You grew up, Angelo." "I did. How long do you think this lasts?" "Long enough." The nurse had already pressed the call button. "In 17 seconds. I know, because I counted with the digital clock on the bassinet, watching the red numbers jump one by one. 2 hospital security guards were at the door, and the handler was picking her bag up off the floor, with the haste of someone who'd already calculated which gossip site headline would lead at 7 in the evening. Angelo let his brother go. Lennox adjusted the collar of his suit with 2 precise tugs, looked Angelo up and down, then looked me up and down with a gaze that had fake pity at the edges, and walked out under escort without turning his head once toward the bassinet where his son was sleeping. Not his, but I didn't know that yet. Shh. The video appeared on the first site at 6:12. Ren called me at 6:15. "Are you seeing this?" "No. I'm at the hospital." "Holly, it's everywhere. Everywhere. Headline with your name, his name, and the word assault, all in the same line. Photo of the escort." I closed my eyes. I felt the hospital pillow press against my nape, rough against the hair still tied in the elastic the nurse had given me that morning. Angelo was standing by the window, his back to me, phone at his ear. He'd started speaking quietly in Italian the moment security took Lennox out. I didn't understand word for word, but I recognized the cadence. He was giving instructions, not asking permission. "Ren," I said, "do you still have that lawyer's number?" Marlo. "I do. But you just gave birth, Holly. Do you want to do this now?" "I want to do this while I still have the nerve." Ren went quiet on the other end for 2 seconds. Then she just said, "Sending it now," and hung up. The text with the number arrived in 20 seconds. I dialed. Marlo Brennan picked up on the second ring. Her voice was dry, low, no flourishes. A voice that already seemed to be late for some hearing, even at 6:30 on an October Friday. "Marlo, this is Holly Ashford Caldwell." "I know. I just saw the video. I want to file for divorce, today. Are you medicated?" "I'm postpartum. I'm lucid. I want to file today." There was a pause on the other end. I heard the sound of a pen being uncapped, the brief friction of the plastic, then the scratch of something being noted on a paper I pictured ruled, by hand, unhurried. "In 40 minutes I'll be at Lenox Hill with the draft. You sign from the bed. The protective order I'll file tomorrow morning with the duty judge. Don't talk to the press, don't talk to your father, don't talk to your husband's handler if she comes back. Is anyone with you?" I looked at Angelo. He had hung up the phone and was looking at me now, hand resting on the window frame, waiting without asking. The sky behind him had already turned that late afternoon blue-gray of Manhattan, with the lights on the buildings across the street coming on one by one, uneven, as if each window had decided on its own. "Yes," I said. "Good. Keep that person between you and the door. Until 40 minutes from now." She hung up. Marlo arrived in 34. She was a shorter woman than I'd imagined. Gray wool coat with a faint smell of rain still clinging to the collar, low-heeled shoes, a battered leather briefcase that looked as if it had survived 3 decades of courtrooms. She greeted Angelo with a nod, without asking who he was. She'd probably already seen his face in one of the headlines from the last hour, and came straight to the bed. "Good evening, Holly. I'll be quick. Please." She pulled a notebook and a stack of handwritten pages from her briefcase, notes she'd made in the car on the way to the hospital. "I won't have the formal draft until tomorrow morning. Tonight we'll do an emergency power of attorney, handwritten. That's enough for me to file the petition first thing tomorrow. Deal? Deal. Custody of Theo? Provisional. Automatically yours, given the circumstances. We'll fight for permanent later. Are you ready for him to try to use the baby as leverage? I am. We'll see. I signed. 7 pages. The pen Marlowe handed me was heavy at the end, cold metal between my fingers, and each signature came out a little firmer than the last, as if my hand were remembering it still knew how to write in its own name. The last signature trembled a little, not from the decision, from the tired arm. Marlowe didn't comment. She gathered the stack, put it in her briefcase, lifted her eyes to Angelo for the first time in the whole meeting. Are you an interested party in this? I'm his brother. That isn't what I asked. Angelo held Marlowe's gaze for half a second. I saw the corner of his mouth move in a way that could have been a smile in another life. I'm her friend. Good. Then tomorrow you leave this room before the press figures out which floor Holly is on, and Holly stays through discharge without unauthorized visitors. Agreed? Agreed. Marlowe turned back to me. Holly, you did the right thing today. Now go rest. She left without any more of a goodbye than that. The door closed behind her with a dry click, and the whole room seemed to shrink back to the size it had been before. A bed, a bassinet, an armchair, a window where Manhattan kept going without me. Shh. It was a few minutes before 9, when a different nurse passed in the hallway, an older woman, in the light blue scrubs of someone who'd worked at the hospital some time back, and had come in just for an afternoon shift. She stopped at my door, looked in, smiled lightly at me, and then looked at Angelo. You're Angelo Vance. It wasn't a question. I am. She tilted her head, studied his face with an unusual calm, as if comparing it to some inner photograph she'd been carrying for 15 years. You don't look like your father. Angelo didn't answer. I saw his Adam's apple move slowly. I took care of your mother for almost 2 years, before she stopped, recalibrated. She would be happy. That's all. Good night. She continued down the corridor. I saw her badge swinging against her light blue scrubs as she passed. I couldn't read the name. Angelo took a long time to come back to the armchair. When he did, he sat and stayed looking at his own hands, dark ink stains on the knuckles of his left fingers, as if his hands were silently commenting on something to him. The low light of the bedside lamp caught his profile in a way I hadn't seen before, the exhaustion of the trip still in his eyes, his jaw set by a sentence he wasn't letting himself say out loud, the faint tremor in his left index finger that he tried to hide by closing his hand and opening it again. I didn't ask. Theo woke up to nurse at 9:30. I brought him to my breast slowly, still sore, and Angelo leaned forward in the armchair with his elbows on his knees, watching without intruding. The lights in the room were low. Outside, some siren crossed the block and was gone, and then the silence came back. Not full silence, but that hospital silence full of small, discreet noises, the hum of the monitor, the sound of a medication cart passing in the distant hallway, the soft breathing of the baby against my collarbone. I looked at him. I looked the way you look at someone when everyone else has left the room, and the question finally fits. Why did this man cross an ocean for a woman he barely knows? I didn't ask out loud. I didn't have the nerve yet, but the question stayed there, suspended between the armchair and the bed, between the ink-stained hands and the sun breathing against my chest, and I knew that sooner or later someone was going to have to answer it. Theo finished nursing and fell back asleep. Angelo, in the armchair, closed his eyes without tilting his head back, like someone who'd learned to sleep standing up long ago and didn't yet trust the world enough to lie down. Chapter 5. Tribeca, 3 weeks later. The first thing I learned about the Tribeca loft was its morning sound. It was different from Lennox's penthouse. There, the silence had the texture of marble, an expensive, watched silence that seemed to listen back. Every footstep in the penthouse echoed against a ceiling that was too high, and even the refrigerator door closed with the reverence of a museum. In Tribeca, the silence was of exposed brick, of old pipes that creaked when the heating kicked on, of a large window facing the Hudson. It was a silence with an accent, with history, with construction dust from the 40s stuck in the cracks of the door frames. I'd wake up at 6, hear Angelo rocking Theo in the open kitchen, and it would take me a full minute to understand that I was at peace. 3 weeks had passed since the hospital discharge. Angelo rented the loft in his own name. No Ashford card, no Vance power of attorney, no holding company between us and the key. He said the deposit amount with the casualness of someone paying for groceries, and when I asked why he'd chosen that neighborhood, he answered, without looking up from the clipboard where he was sketching, because it's far. I understood what he meant. The ceilings were high, the walls raw brick, the kitchen open to the living room. The windows faced the river, and on bright October afternoons, the light came in through the yellow leaves and hit the pale wood floor as if the city had, for a moment, decided to be kind to me. The smell of the loft was of coffee made through a cloth filter, of mild soap, of bread he bought at the Portuguese bakery on the corner and left to cool on a cutting board. Angelo slept in the guest room. I was in the main bedroom with Theo's crib 3 steps from the bed. Between us, every night, a 5-meter hallway that felt like the longest in the world. The routine happened before either of us decided to have one. He'd wake up at 3 for Theo. I knew because I'd hear the door of my room close carefully when he came in to get the baby so I wouldn't have to get up. I'd wake at 6 and find him at the counter, hair tousled, t-shirt rumpled, Theo asleep again in a carrier strapped to his chest. He cooked fresh pasta at night, flour, egg, and silence according to him. And when I told him he was being too solemn about talking about noodles, he laughed for the first time in front of me. It was a short laugh, restrained, but I saw it. The touches started happening without either of us agreeing to it. It was when he passed Theo from arm to arm in the doorway of the bedroom, his fingers brushing my wrist, me pretending not to feel it. It was when he reached for a coffee canister on the top shelf behind me, his chest against my back for a second, his breath warm on the nape of my neck, him stepping back immediately, neither of us mentioning it. It was his hand at the middle of my back when he passed behind me in the narrow kitchen corridor. 3 fingers, 2 seconds, and the sense that something inside me stayed lit for hours afterward. I was counting those touches without meaning to. I knew how many had happened in the morning, how many at night, how many during Theo's bath. I didn't count because I wanted more. I counted because it was the first time a body had come close to mine without asking for anything in return. On Wednesday of the 3rd week, Ren convinced me to go out. "You need to breathe Manhattan air that doesn't smell like diapers," she said, hoisting herself onto the counter stool. "Lunch in Chelsea. My treat. You just need to put on lipstick." I put on lipstick. The restaurant was small, on the corner of 20th and 10th Avenue, waxed wood tables and late fall light coming in at an angle through the window. The air carried a distant smell of singed rosemary, and from the kitchen came the rhythmic sound of a knife on a board. I ordered a soup I wasn't going to manage to eat, and Ren ordered wine I wasn't going to touch. We were laughing at a story about a gallery collector who'd tried to pay for a sculpture in crypto when I heard the voice I'd been avoiding for 2 years. Holly, darling. Odette LaRue, Lennox's ex, before me, 33 years old, whiskey-colored hair, a smile that depended on the audience. She was at a table 3 over, with 2 women I recognized from charity dinners. She raised her glass in my direction, as if we were close friends, and returned my public smile at a volume controlled, so the whole room would hear what came next. "You look radiant. I didn't imagine you'd bounce back so fast. Women who hop from brother to brother usually take longer to put themselves back together." The 2 women with Odette heard it. The neighboring table did too. One of them dropped her eyes to her plate, with that New York politeness that pretends not to be listening while saving every word. I felt my left wrist, the place where my mother had worn a bracelet until I was 14, and for a second I thought I was going to touch it. I didn't. Instead, I bit my lower lip. Just once. Just long enough to remember who I was now, and stood up. I crossed the space between my table and hers calmly. Ren froze with her glass in midair. "Odette," I said, and my voice came out low, controlled, the way I'd learned to speak as a child at dinners where I couldn't cry. "I've known you since I was 20. You've had the same line since you were 25. At some point in the next 10 years, you're going to need a new one, because that one doesn't even fit you anymore." She opened her mouth. One of the women beside her looked away toward her glass, and I saw, with a satisfaction I felt no shame about, the corner of her mouth curve before she could stop it. "And just to save you the trouble," I went on, now looking at the 2 women with her, "I didn't hop from brother to brother. I left one. That's different. Good afternoon." I went back to my table, sat, drank water, didn't look back. Ren watched me for a stretch that was too long to be comfortable and too short to be dramatic. "I love you," she said, in a normal voice. "And my ex tried to take the dog in the divorce. I don't know why I remembered that just now." I laughed. I really laughed. From the stomach. And it was the first time in months. We left together onto the sidewalk. The October wind was cutting across 10th Avenue at a diagonal, lifting yellow leaves from the planters, and I closed my coat up to my chin. I didn't cry in the car. I got back to the loft at the end of the afternoon, Theo in the arms of the temporary nanny Marlowe had recommended, and Angelo at the kitchen with stained hands. Not ink this time, tomato sauce. "How was it?" he asked, without turning. I hung up my coat, sat on the counter stool. The wooden seat still held the distant warmth of the afternoon sun, that had been hitting the window for hours. I told him, Odette's line, the silent room, my answer. I didn't dress it up. I didn't tremble. When I finished, he had turned off the burner and was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, looking at me the way he looked when he was paying attention to all angles at once. I admire you, he said. It was 3 words. The floor went out from under me. I'd been complimented before. I'd been called elegant, discreet, patient, a good daughter, a good wife by men who said those words like ticking off an inventory. No one had ever told me they admired me. I didn't know where to put the sentence in my body. I tried to hold his gaze and couldn't. Not all of it. I looked at the pan behind his shoulder, at the window behind the pan, at the river darkening behind the window, and came back. He held out a cup of tea. Chamomile, I think. The ceramic was hotter than comfortable, the steam rising in a thin thread that trembled between us. His fingers touched mine on the handle, and this time neither of us pretended it hadn't been on purpose. He came closer. I saw it happen because he came slowly, the way someone enters a room where someone is sleeping. He braced one hand on the counter, beside my waist, and the other hovered in the air between us, undecided. His smell was mild soap and tomato sauce, and I thought, with ridiculous clarity, that it was the most honest smell I'd ever encountered in a kitchen. His beard had grown a little since the morning. I noticed, at the corner of his jaw, a small smudge of flour he hadn't seen when he wiped himself off. He leaned in. The kiss was short. It was his mouth touching mine for 2 seconds, maybe 3, long enough for me to feel the warmth and the shape and the weight, and not long enough for anything else. The cup between my hands heated up again, or I was the one who heated up and pushed the warmth out. We pulled back at the same time, as if we'd agreed on it. Too soon, he murmured. I know, I answered. It wasn't too soon for the kiss. It was too soon for everything that would come after, and we both knew it, and that's why neither of us pulled back too far. He kept his hand on the counter at my side. I kept the cup between my fingers. It took my breathing a while to come back to normal. At the back of the room, the heating clicked once, and the familiar sound made the whole air fit back inside me again. Later, after Theo was asleep, he leaned against my bedroom door with his sketchbook in hand. Have you ever drawn the place? I didn't have to ask which place. He was asking about the foundation, about the building I'd never said out loud I wanted to build, the project I'd been carrying in a black notebook since I was 22, that I'd never shown Lennox, that I'd never shown my father, that I'd never shown anyone. I hesitated. I bit my lip. I went to get the notebook. I came back and sat on the floor of the living room, beside him, beside the low gray sofa he'd chosen, with the yellow light of the floor lamp falling at an angle over our legs. I opened to the first page. They were bad sketches, childish, the strokes of someone who'd never studied architecture. Windows too big, stairs with no railing, a waiting room with a pale wood floor, and a window facing an inner garden that I'd drawn in layers because I didn't know how to draw depth. He looked at everything. He turned the pages slowly. His index finger traced the margin of each page with a reverence I hadn't expected, and that gave me, in my chest, a pang that felt like shame and like courage at the same time. This inner garden, he said, stopping on page 6, works. You're just putting the staircase in the wrong place. He picked up a pencil, rested the notebook on his thigh, fixed the staircase with 3 strokes. I looked at his hand, ink-stained, sketching over my idea of a future I'd never admitted out loud, and I understood something I still couldn't name. When he went to the guest room, I stayed in the living room a while longer. Theo was sleeping in the crib. The snow hadn't started falling yet, but I could already feel the air changing, a new cold coming in through the gap in the window, the river's sound lower, thicker, the way it gets when the temperature drops at night. I got up and went to the crib. Theo was on his side, lips parted. He smiled in his sleep, those baby smiles that don't mean anything, that are only reflex. I looked at the curve of his chin, and for a second, just a second, something inside me almost recognized someone. I closed my eyes. Tiredness, I thought. It's just tiredness. I went back to bed. Chapter 6. The Snow and Her Sentence. 7 weeks later, the snow started on Monday morning. I was in the back of a car heading to the Upper East Side, my coat buttoned up to my chin and my phone buzzing twice a minute. Theo had stayed with Angelo at the loft. Ren had offered to come with me. I said no. Some doors you have to walk through alone. The snow was falling fine over 5th Avenue, the way New York snow falls before it turns to ice in the pipes. Almost polite, almost asking permission. I looked through the foggy window at Central Park, white on the opposite side, with the black branches cutting across the pale gray sky, and for a second I remembered being 7 years old, skating at Woolman Rink with my mother holding the back of my coat hood so I wouldn't fall. She had died 7 years after that morning. The mansion I was heading to still had her portrait intact, and still had her cold intact. The Fifth Avenue mansion was just like my childhood. White marble, crystal chandelier in the foyer, my mother's portrait on the second landing of the staircase, still young, still alive within the frame. I didn't look at the portrait. I crossed the foyer, crossed the gallery, and walked into the sitting room where Harlan was waiting for me. My father, 58 years old, patriarch of the Ashford conglomerate, over 100 years of finance and real estate, 3/3 of Manhattan depending on his mood on a Monday morning. He was sitting in the armchair I remembered from my 9th birthday, with the coffee cup resting on his knee, and he didn't stand up when I walked in. The smell of the coffee was the same as always, some expensive blend from a warehouse in Brooklyn that he had delivered twice a month. In that room, even the smell was inherited. I sat down in the armchair across from him. "You haven't taken my calls for 2 weeks," he began. "You haven't made one I wanted to take in 2 years. He looked at me for a while. I didn't lower my eyes. I touched my left wrist once, let my hand rest in my lap, and waited. "You're living with his brother," he said finally, "with the child, in Tribeca, in an apartment he rented. You understand what this looks like?" "I understand what this is. It's not the same thing." "No, it's not." He set the cup down on the table. It was a small, definitive gesture, the way my father always made definitive gestures. No raised voice, no threat, just the firm wrist of a man accustomed to being obeyed by the silence that followed. For a second, I had the strange feeling that the whole room was waiting along with him. The candelabras, the never-read books, the pendulum clock on the wall that kept ticking as if the time inside there were the official one. "If you don't go back to the penthouse this week, I'll take your name out of the will. I'll take your name off the boards. I'll give an interview to the Times and the Journal on Friday saying that you had a psychiatric episode after giving birth and that the family is worried. I'll destroy, in 48 hours, 2 years of the reputation you've built at your symbolic foundation and 3 years of what you still want to build. You know I can. I know you can." So, I bit my lip once. Just once. "Take it all," I said. "I'm keeping my son." I stood up. He didn't say anything else. Neither did I. I crossed the gallery, the foyer, the front door, and walked down the marble steps with the snow already settling on the shoulders of my coat. I didn't look back. I got into the car. I gave the address in Tribeca. I only started trembling when the car turned onto Madison, and even then the trembling was in my hands, not the rest of me, as if the rest of me had already learned to leave that house before my body did. On Tuesday morning, at Marlowe Brennan's office in Midtown, I recorded the interview. Marlowe was 40 years old and had a voice that didn't ask permission to enter anywhere. She wore black, spoke in short sentences, took notes by hand in a lined notebook that seemed too expensive for the use she made of it. When she saw me come in with the black sketchbook under my arm, she raised an eyebrow and said only, "Good, you brought work." The journalist from the New York Times Magazine arrived at 10, a woman in her early 50s, with a recorder, a notepad, and the patience of someone who had already had this kind of conversation in too many kitchens. Marlowe sat next to me. The journalist sat across. I spoke for 1 hour and 40 minutes. I told her about the arranged marriage. I told her about the honeymoon. I told her about the 3 incidents I had tried to forget, and that now felt outside of me, events archived in a body that was no longer mine. I told her about the marble corridor at Vance Holdings. I told her about the raised hand in the hospital room. I told her about the resignation I was going to sign that afternoon. I didn't cry. When the journalist asked why I was giving up the inheritance, I said the only sentence I had rehearsed, because I don't want my son to inherit money conditioned on silence. Marlowe looked at me with an expression I had never seen on a lawyer, something between professional pride and involuntary motherhood. When the journalist left, she just said, "You're signing this now." I signed. In the morning, before the recording, Wren stopped by the loft. She had her dark hair shorter than I remembered, and a bag of Thai food that she set on the counter the way someone sets down a report. Angelo was in Theo's room, rocking the baby to sleep. I poured tea. The loft smelled of ginger and Thai basil, and the smell was so far from the Ashford Vance world that it made me want to laugh. Wren slid onto the stool and stared at me for a minute before speaking. "I filed for divorce on Friday." I set the cup down. "Wren, it's okay. There's no one else involved. There's no fight. There's just nothing left." She stirred the spoon inside the tea that I knew she wouldn't drink. I looked at him Saturday morning and realized I haven't laughed inside our house in 3 years. Then I thought about you laughing at the restaurant the other day, and I felt ashamed, not of my life, of the time I let go by. Why didn't you tell me before? Because you were having a baby, she said, with a patience I didn't deserve. And because I wanted you to see first that it was possible to get out. You got out, so I could get out too. I didn't cry. Neither did she. I reached my hand across the counter and she squeezed it. It was the shortest squeeze in the world, and it was enough. Angelo appeared in the kitchen doorway with Theo on his shoulder, saw us both, and did the thing I had already understood he did. Took half a step back, fell silent, left the room to us. Ren smiled at the corner of her mouth when he walked away. That one, she said low. That one's worth it. It was the only sentence she said about Angelo all autumn. At night, the snow was steady. The living room window faced Hudson Street, and the flakes came in sideways, the way New York snow comes when the wind from the river enters the city. The headlights of the taxis below turned into blurred yellow smudges behind the glass, and the building's heating made a deep old pipe sound that had become, without my realizing it, one of the sounds I associated with the word home. Theo was sleeping in the crib, in his room. The lights in the living room were low, just the corner lamp and the electric fireplace that Angelo had insisted on buying, even though I thought it was ridiculous. The New York Times Magazine had published the online version of the interview an hour earlier. My father had given his Friday interview on Tuesday night, moving up the schedule. It lasted 4 minutes on air. On social media, the video of my recording from that afternoon, the audio with the line about inheriting money conditioned on silence, had more views than my entire Ashford life. Marlowe had called at 9 saying that 3 major investors of the Vance conglomerate were pulling back from the year-end deal. Lennox had sent 2 lawyers to the apartment on Tuesday morning, before the recording. The older one, gray suit, opened his folder on my counter without asking permission, and read the proposal in a low voice. Joint custody of Theo in exchange for me dropping the financial settlement. The younger one kept his eyes on the floor. When he finished, I took the paper from his hand, held it in front of both of them for the length of one breath, and ripped it in half. Ripped it again. Put the pieces back in the folder. That's a draft, I said. Drafts get torn up. They left without answering. Marlowe called me later saying I couldn't tear up documents. I said it had been a draft, and drafts get torn up. All of that was today. I sat down on the couch. Angelo sat next to me, his shoulder touching mine, and stayed quiet. The snow kept falling outside. Theo kept sleeping. For a while, it was just the sound of the heating clicking in the pipes, and my breathing starting to slow down for the first time in 7 weeks. I could feel the warmth of his arm through the thin fabric of the blouse I was wearing, and I realized it was the first full day, since the birth, that no one had asked me to be strong. He was just there. He didn't demand a narrative, didn't demand a version, didn't demand that I explain the trembling in my hands. I'll stay, he said very low, as long as you want. I looked at his hand, resting on his knee, stained with blue ink from some sketch I hadn't seen. The stain ran along the cuticle of his thumb and down to his wrist, and for some reason it seemed to me, that night, the most honest detail in the world. I want you to stay. I said it first. He turned to me slowly. I turned to him. The kiss this time wasn't 2 seconds. It was his hand rising to the nape of my neck, my hand on his chest, his mouth finding mine in a way that wasn't rushed, because both of us had finally stopped pretending this was too soon. I smelled him up close for the first time without flinching. Soap, paper, a trace of afternoon coffee, and I felt his heart beating beneath my palm in a rhythm that wasn't his usual controlled rhythm. I stood up first. I held out my hand. He took it. The bedroom door closed behind us. I woke up before him. The bedroom window was pale gray, that shade of winter morning that hasn't decided yet whether it's day. Angelo was sleeping on his side, facing me, with one hand still stretched out toward where I had been. His fingers were stained with blue ink. I stayed a minute watching, not moving, not breathing too loud, with the ridiculous feeling that if I moved too much the night before, might decide not to have happened. The sheet rose and fell on his chest in a slow rhythm, and I could see, for the first time so close up, the small, thin scar he had just below his left collarbone, an old mark I didn't know about, and that I understood. In that instant, I was going to have time to learn where it came from. I got up slowly. I put on his shirt. I crossed the hallway barefoot, and the cold wood floor of the loft made the soles of my feet tingle in a way that made me feel, for no reason, completely awake. Theo was awake in the crib, but quiet, the way babies are when they haven't decided yet whether to cry. His eyes were open. He smiled when he saw me, not at me exactly, more at the light coming through the window, or at his own hand moving near his face. I leaned over the crib, and I saw the curve of the chin, the slightly crooked smile, the shape of the eyes that were a little too open for an 8-week-old baby. For a second, just 1 second, something in me stopped at his face without quite knowing what. Almost. I closed my eyes. I touched my left wrist once. I opened my eyes again. Theo was already distracting himself with his own hand. Tiredness, I thought. It's snowing. I went to sleep late. It's not the time. I picked the baby up. He fit against my neck as if he had always fit there. I went back to bed, with Theo in my arms, and lay down next to Angelo. He stirred in his sleep, opened one eye, saw the two of us, and stretched his arm over the baby. I closed my eyes. I slept on top of the question. Hey, Kay here. That's it for book 1. But guess what? Book 2 is already done. You can grab access to it for just a small fee.
I crossed an ocean for Holly, held her hand through labor, and swore I'd never be like Lennox. For 3 months, I almost believed it. She slept beside me. Theo laughed in my lap. The war seemed to have stayed outside the door. Until I faced my reflection with the baby in my arms. The chin, the eyes, the mark on the shoulder. Everything about Theo screamed a truth Holly never spoke. Because there was a night. A single night that should never have happened. And when I looked at Theo in my arms, my blood ran cold. That day, I asked a question that could destroy all 3 of us. And when she answered, I understood that maybe I hadn't saved my brother's wife. Maybe I had loved, this whole time, the one lie capable of destroying me.
Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to catch the upcoming ones, look for Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube for the best billionaire and CEO romance content. Remember, the official channels are Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube and the My Stories platform. I'll be waiting for you there. With love, Kay. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.